Hey, everybody, good afternoon and welcome. This is Anthony D'Ambrosio and Jason Brand from Supply Chain Solutions, and you are listening to the Ship Show Series podcast, the show that gives you the inside angle on all things related to supply chain, logistics, and beyond. So today's April 4th, 2024, and it's that time again, everyone. It's all about the FMR, the Freight Market Roundup. So let's dive in and find out what's going on with the global and domestic market conditions. But before we do, I just want to ask Jason how his Easter holiday was and what's happening. How are you?
Oh, Easter holiday was, I'm doing great, Anthony. Thank you so much. Easter holiday was wild. It was a very, very eventful holiday in general. I don't think I've had, well, so we just obviously had, we just had our son, Charlie. And so it was like a revolving door of family on every single day. And it was big. Our son hasn't even recovered on the lack of sleep from that holiday until he's been screaming at me every time I see him, because he's like I think newborns are like old men in some ways.
That's why I'm asking.
Yeah, they're in their routine. You messed it. It's your fault. What was that? Oh gosh. So anyway, yeah. Anthony, thank you. And I'm Jason Brand. I'm the Director of Outreach and Partner Development here at Supply Chain Solutions. Anthony D'Ambrosio, he's our VP of Business Development. And like you said, we come together, Freight Market Roundup. It's time to run through what's going on in the world, what our customers are talking to us about, what we're worried about, what we're thinking about, just what is going on. Giving you a temperature check, really, of what's happening. We're going to focus on our ocean lanes. That's generally what we do. But we are going to switch it up. If you are normally here, we normally start with our Trans-Pacific, which is essentially crossing the Pacific, but we really focus on imports into the U.S. So it's Southeast Asia, China. But today, we are going to flip it over. We're going to start with the Transatlantic, Europe coming into the East Coast. But before I do that, a little bit more. The March 2024 Logistics Manager Index report came out, and I think we should talk about it because it's definitely going to affect you. It's definitely going to affect your operations and your prices going forward, because we've got some big things happening there. So the March report of the Logistics Managers Index, so LMI, if you hear that term, LMI, that's what it is. It was calculated to be at around 58.3. Now, quick reminder of that number. What's the range? What's the things like that? So if the index is above 50, it means we're in a state of growth. If it's below 50, it means we're in a state of contraction. So 58.3, how does that fall in the grand scheme of things? That's actually pretty substantial growth, right? 50 is going to be nothing, and we're 8 points over in the growth range. So that is very substantial. If we dive into the specifics of the report, it kind of talks about how 58.3 is March. This is up 1.8 points from February, which had a rating of 56.5. And it actually happens to be the fastest rate of expansion we have seen since back in September of 2022, when it was a 61.2. So pandemic years, obviously a very, very, it's hard to compare the data to that. We really have to go back to 2019, but I didn't come prepared to show you the 2019 numbers. So we could talk about that next week, but still consider that. So what does a 58.3 really mean? What it's actually showing, and really this is what the report breaks down, is it's showing that growth is happening in an increasing rate right now. And this is specifically in regards to inventory levels, inventory costs, warehouse prices, and transportation utilization. It's also showing that growth is increasing at a decreasing rate. A little bit complicated there, but just think through that one. So that's for specifically the areas of warehouse utilization, transportation capacity, and transportation prices. And then warehouse capacity in general is contracting. So, but think about that, right? If we're utilizing more space, we're going to be running out of space. So that's why warehouse capacity is contracting in general. If you are experiencing increases in costs in the warehousing or the inventory management realm, this is one of the reasons why you definitely should be keeping your eye on this report. And just because we're seeing this fastest growth in the LMI that we've seen for, since 2022, September, this is something that's going to affect you, and you're going to have to be dealing with. So keep that in mind. Now, I'd like to move this along to our transatlantic. Let's talk about that. And it's important we start here in lieu of the massive disruption that's happened in Baltimore. So talking about rates, remember, we're focusing on the ocean shipping portion. Last week, our customers were able to ship on this lane for around, well, it was really an absolute bargain, but it was between 1,800 and 2,300 per 40-foot container. Now, this is an average of all of the ports we've shipped out of in Europe last week and into all of the ports we shipped into in the U.S. East Coast. Our weighted average, where most of the shipments were kind of like coming from and ending up, was around $2,044. Now, Anthony, let's talk about what is going on the East Coast in lieu of this Baltimore situation.
Well, it's a very tragic situation, and thank you, Jay. I mean, as everyone knows by now, at 1:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time on Tuesday, March 26th, the Francis Scott Key Bridge in Baltimore collapsed after being struck by a container ship. Now, the ship, as everyone knows, was named the Dolly. It's a 300-meter long ship, 94 tons. The vessel was operated on a charter slot basis with Maersk Line and was part of the 2M Alliance service between Asia and the U.S. East Coast. Now, the Dolly was traveling from Baltimore to Colombo, Sri Lanka, when the ship lost power prior to hitting a structural pillar of the bridge, and the bridge collapsed instantaneously. And many lives were lost, and still very tragic. But just to put it in perspective, I'd like to give you an idea of the type of volume and the commodities that move through the port. So while Baltimore is not one of the biggest ports in the United States, it's very strategic, and it's a good moderate-sized port with 5 public and 12 private terminals to handle port traffic. And, just to give everyone a little flavor here, in 2023, it handled $59 billion worth of imports and $22 billion worth of exports. And, so it does cars, it does bulk carriers, it does containers, it does passenger ships. So it's going to be a big impact for not only, the state of Maryland, the city of Baltimore, the port, but for the East Coast of the United States and the country. I mean, it's really going to affect the economy. And right now, we're just feeling a few little ripple effects. But it's what's going to happen over the coming months that's really going to become a big problem for us on the East Coast of the United States. Now, Baltimore is the top port in the nation for automobile shipments, having imported and exported more than 750,000 vehicles last year. And about 3/4 of the autos that travel through the port are imports, and they're dominated by big name brands like Mazda and Mercedes-Benz and many other companies. And although many of these top auto importers and top auto companies have enough inventory sitting on U.S. dealers' lots right now, I think the immediate impact to supply of automobiles on the East Coast is unlikely to affect consumers in the short term. But once that stock starts to dwindle, it's going to have a devastating impact on the auto business on the East Coast of the United States. And there will most assuredly be, shortages of automobiles and disruptions on the East Coast unless, things changed over the next, 6 to 8 months. And the port is also ranked second in the country for exporting coal. And so while it's not a huge global supplier of thermal coal, which is that big export out of Baltimore, the impacts will be felt, unfortunately. So it's very sad. And then I think, the immediate impact to the bridge, Jason, to this bridge collision and this collapse, I mean, as of today, there's more than 40 ships, including cargo ships, currently inside the port of Baltimore or on the Patapsco River west of the Francis Scott Key Bridge that are unable to leave the area. So, you could only imagine, right? These vessels are stuck right now. And even though the Army Corps of Engineers is on site, and they did open up a small channel, it's not large enough for some of these ships to get out. Yeah. So you could only imagine the cargo owners, the importers, the exporters that have cargo stuck on these vessels, every day that they're stuck at the port, tied up to, and berthed and they're unable to move. It's costing money every day. Yeah. I mean, what a lot of folks don't realize, Jay, is It's like when you go and you park somewhere in the city and you have to put money in your parking meter.
Yeah.
Well, it costs money to be berthed at these ports every day.
Oh yeah. Well, you just think about all the schedules, right? That were, that happened, and now everything is diverted, right? All of the cargo there is also needs to be. You've got to take a system that we've learned very. I mean, we all had a great lesson in this during the pandemic. It can't handle disruption at key points very well. We know this. And you've got a major disruption at one of the ports, and you're taking a finite number of, supply of chassis, of trucks and things like that. And you're removing them from their area where they operate most effectively. So that's so challenging. And, despite that, obviously, your ocean rates really have not reflected the dilemma going on, but the fees likely will. If you're shipping into these areas, you could expect, and you should expect, to have some really frustrating fees. But that being said, I want to quick tip the hat back to OSRA 2022 and OSRA 2.0 that we talked about last week. You have to watch your demurrage and detention charges nowadays, because it was the goal of those pieces of legislation to really make sure only in fair situations, and there's 13 elements that make up a fair situation, can you be charged those. Not totally derailed that, but I mean, that's something you got to consider shipping into the East Coast right now.
So think about this. Cargo already discharged from vessels should be able to be picked up from the port.
Yeah.
Cargo not discharged from vessels will likely experience discharge delays based on port operations. And cargo on trapped vessels that are planned to be unloaded at other East Coast ports will be subject to the direction taken by the vessel operators and owners. So there's the potential to redistribute cargo to other ports via truck or rail, but this will really require a coordinated effort from the vessel operators and owners and the Port of Baltimore. And we're waiting to hear more about this, as you know. And then the other rub is that container vessels with Baltimore in their rotation, okay, as of the date of the incident last week, I mean, there's 107 ships headed to the Port of Baltimore right now as we speak. Mm-hmm. So every one of these ships is going to have to be diverted to either Norfolk, Philadelphia, New York, or New Jersey, and discharge cargo in some of these areas. So while Norfolk, New York, and New Jersey are typical ports of calls on these vessel rotations, while they're headed to Baltimore, for smaller ports like Philadelphia, who do a lot of fruit and a lot of cocoa beans and other bulk carrier vessels, there's going to be a lot of, volume coming into the system that they're not used to handling. Mm-hmm. And one thing I want to focus on real quick is what the downstream effect is to the neighboring ports. So while Baltimore is one of the smaller ports by containerized freight volume on the U.S. East Coast, I mean, last year they handled about 800,000 TEUs compared to the neighboring ports of New York and New Jersey, which did 5.1 million TEU last year, and the port of Norfolk did 2.4 million. Okay, mm-hmm. But what's interesting about Baltimore is that it's an essential port with specialized infrastructure to handle bulk commodities in the major manufacturing corridors, and it handles the second highest amount of hazardous materials in the country in that I-94, I-95 corridor, things like gas and oil and liquid nitrogen, many toxic and flammable substances. So we have to keep in mind that the bridge is the outermost of 3 toll crossings of Baltimore's harbor, and it's the only one that's not a tunnel. And it was constructed specifically to alleviate the traffic and provide a route for all these vehicles carrying hazardous materials, which were not allowed and are still not allowed to go through the tunnels. So one last thing, Jay, before we go to key takeaways. So to put it in context, if the cargo originally destined for the Port of Baltimore is redistributed to these other ports we're talking about, New York, New Jersey, Norfolk, Philly, okay, these ports would increase by just under 10% in terms of their volume uptick. Now, that doesn't seem to be like a huge bump, It's a moderate increase, right? But the bigger concern is whether the truck and rail systems, which you hit on just a little while ago, Jason, when you start talking about chassis and drayage, right? Uh, can they adapt quickly enough to handle this sudden surge of cargo volume? So that's really another whole fly in the ointment.
Yeah.
And, we could actually do a whole nother show on the impact of the drayage industry on the
Hmm.
East Coast now.
Yeah.
So I thought you'd get a charge out of that.
I do honestly. I loved the way you kind of broke that down and focused on some of the uniqueness of what ships into Baltimore and some of the necessity, at least, of that bridge, and now kind of the dilemma going forward. Once it's cleaned up, once the port's back to operational, how are those types of cargo going to go through Baltimore anymore? Is it going to make sense anymore? But we also have the dilemma of all the regulation associated with that area that's allowed those types of shipments to move through effectively in the past. And what is the alternative now, right? This is these are a lot of things. Actually, during the last couple of years of the pandemic, there was a lot of talk about some of these new lanes that opened up specifically, like you were saying, for automotive manufacturers, specifically around Baltimore. And it is going to be very fascinating to see how all of this changes. And really, I think we almost in like 6 months from now, we kind of do like a recap, like, okay, where are we at today versus where we were at before? And for shippers who are shipping some of these unique style goods, what is your best alternative now at this point? I love how you dove into that.
Yeah, no, I'm grateful. I appreciate that. But one last thing, because I know you want to we want to focus back on the Trans-Pacific and some of the other freight market roundup, details. But just one last thing, there are four key impacts to the East Coast of the United States and the Port of Baltimore that's going to affect everything. And these are shipping disruption, port operations, workforce and industries, and safety and industry concerns. So when we talk about the shipping disruption, the bridge collapse severely disrupted, as everyone knows, shipping operations. And because this bridge was a critical link for transporting goods to and from the port.
Mm-hmm.
So with the collapse, all vessel traffic right now in Baltimore is currently suspended. And it's affecting all movement of cargo and vessels. The second thing are the port operations are completely halted, maybe down to like 90% halted. Okay. All vessel traffic in and out of the Port of Baltimore has come to a standstill. And this interruption affects not only the port itself, but also the industries that rely on the port, like the automobile and transportation and other, wheeled equipment like heavy machinery. Okay. There's a lot of heavy machinery that goes out of the Port of Baltimore. And then there's the workforce and the industries. The third thing is the workforce and industry. So, think about it. Approximately 8,000 workers are at the Port of Baltimore every day, and they're all going to be directly impacted. So people can't go to work. Right now they have a skeleton crew in the Port of Baltimore. Okay. And all of these industries connected to the port's operation are going to face significant challenges due to the sudden disruption. And, we're talking about the loss of the bridge. It's going to affect the flow of goods and materials, and it's going to lead to delays, economic losses. And, President Biden was just saying a few days ago that it's a national security concern. And it's a very tragic situation. And then lastly, and the last thing, and I'll send it back to you, Jay, is safety and infrastructure concerns. So the collapse really highlights the concern about the bridge's safety and its infrastructure designs. A couple of years ago, engineers previously warned about the bridge's vulnerability, and they emphasized in their report that it would not survive a direct hit from a container ship. Okay. If just a quick analogy, if people have seen the Verrazano Bridge, okay, I mean, it's massive compared to this Francis Scott Key Bridge. It's my opinion that it would survive a direct hit, okay, because it's so massive and so differently built versus the Scott Key Bridge, okay. So I think what this has done now, I mean, aside from the tragic loss of lives, including the road workers and an inspector that lost their life, it underscores the need for robust safety measures and a thorough assessment of not only every bridge structure in the USA, but it's a phenomenon now where countries around the world, I was reading articles last night, everybody's looking at bridges now as a result of this. So
Yeah.
I want to send it back to you, Jay, because I know you have some other things you want to touch on.
No,
but
great overview, though. Seriously, fantastic overview.
terrible situation down there,
Yeah.
folks.
Very, very true. We're going to dive into the Trans-Pacific, and we're going to talk about what our customers are paying for the ocean shipping portion. So get your invoices out, take a little double check. These are as of last week. If you're above or below this, give us a call, because other way we want to know what you're doing. So roughly our average came in at around $3,400. This is from all ports out of Southeast Asia and China, coming into the U.S. West Coast. Our customers averaged $3,400. The lowest shipment we had, shipment cost wise, ocean portion alone, was $3,100, and the most expensive one we had was right below $3,700. So if you're above or below that range, if you're below that range, please give us a call. We really want to know what you're doing there. That's fantastic. Like, oh man, there's a lot of stuff happening on the West Coast right now, and I touched on a little bit of one of the things I wanted to talk about. So Samsung, just last week, they re-engaged their battle over demurrage and detention issues, and they are reenacting, and they're talking about what's going on in OSRA 2022 and OSRA 2.0. But some facts on this that are pretty phenomenal, because the fallout from the pandemic and the cost increased from the pandemic, right? We had very expensive shipment costs, but then we also had all of this demurrage and detention and fees. And, it was the bill you got was only the beginning of the pain. And that was the terrible thing for a lot of people. Then you also had no idea what your lead time was going to be, and a multitude of other things. But just to give you an idea, Samsung is one of the top 10 largest U.S. importers, and they paid more than 26,000 demurrage and detention bills, individual bills, and they're upset, to say the very least. They're going directly after Costco and OOCL. In a statement, they basically said the two ocean carriers did nearly nothing to address the truck and rail delays that were, causing Samsung to be put in this situation. And then they retaliated when Samsung complained about their lack of effort in getting those containers moving. So with this, this is not the only company that is levying these complaints specifically against OOCL and Costco. There are 4 large complaints going through, and they're all pointing to the OSRA 2022 and OSRA 2.0 rules. And specifically, they're looking at this FMC's incentive principle, which really encourages shippers to promptly move the cargo out of the marine terminals. And it's kind of taken a very, very laser focus on that area. So we really got to keep in mind, you got to keep that in mind. You've got to have a good understanding of what the new demurrage and detention rules are. I hope we can enter an era where that's not slapped around so easily, because that is not fair to shippers at all. The process can be really difficult also for us as logistics companies working with the shipping lines, because sometimes when they begin free time and your availability to actually move the container, some things just are completely ridiculous. And we've gone through month-long campaigns trying to defend our customers. It can be very frustrating. So, quite frankly, we're pretty excited about a little bit more attention on this. Now, I do also want to talk about something else, and this is just unfortunate because, just talking about the Baltimore situation. So we are noticing a bit of a trend, but there has been fewer ocean shipping lines that have been blanking sailings. And specifically, this is happening on the Trans-Pacific. It's actually a very statistically significant amount of reduced blank sailings, because currently we're at the lowest point of blank sailings in the next 30 days that we've been at for the past 2 years. And there is a really big reason behind this. This is due to just tighter global capacity. So what does that mean? What do you mean? Is more stuff shipping? Well, the real issue is the Red Sea, and the idea that all of those shipments, instead of going the much shorter route, are now going around Africa. And so you just have soaked up capacity, I think is the best way of putting it, and capacity that's engaged for longer. So as a result, capacity had to be deployed in other areas to make up for that lack of rotation for those ships. Now, there's another factor here that's a little bit hidden in plain sight, but, our attention's on kind of the Red Sea issues because it has been pretty terrible. But schedule reliability has been just pitiful in general still, especially given how far out we are from these dilemmas. And also, last year we were not going gangbusters in the shipping world. We had the ability to really fix some schedule reliability problems. Don't get me wrong, we had fallout in some areas that have been taking a very long time to just fix in general. We had a lot of labor union issues that happened all across different links of the supply chain over the past couple of years. So that is also, factored into the rebuilding process, how these companies are affording the new wages and how they're staffing. There's a lot of things going into this, but still our schedule reliability has been just very, very, very unfortunately low. Here's a great example. So schedule reliability from Asia to the US West Coast fell from 44.2%, to 44.2% from 48.5% in January. And then Asia to the US East Coast on-time performance slipped all the way down to 33.4%. Now, smaller slip, but it was sitting at 33.9% before. Worse than a coin toss if your vessel's going to show up on time. I mean, and if you compare that to the rest of the world, what's happening on average? The rest of the world is completely just doing substantially better than we are in this standpoint. Actually, most recently, the schedule reliability globally has increased. It went up from 51.6% to 53.53%. Now, that's the rest of the world on average, right? There's areas that are going to be better, areas that are going to be worse, but you can see we're well in the red when it comes to schedule reliability. And I really think this highlights the importance of having a little bit of technology, watching how you're shipping, helping your suppliers and your customers get real-time updates on what is going on. So they're completely in the know. And, just in general, we can create a smoother and better transportation experience.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And let's not forget, like you were talking about, those not as many blank sailings. As we approach Labor Day and new contract season, and with everything still with the Red Sea situation impacting everything, there's going to be a long holiday in mainland China in April as we go into the Qingming festival. So production's probably going to be impacted a little bit, but we do expect those bookings to increase in late April and then slow down in the first week of May. But just to point that out, Jason. But back to you.
No, that's perfect. Actually, and that's a great. We harped on a couple different areas which I really like that we did today. One of the things I want to mention is we're not going to talk about rates right now between Asia and Europe, simply because there's a lot of fluctuation there, and it's just not. We were taking a look at the data, and it just wouldn't necessarily be accurate. We might have a fantastic rate, but the ability to consistently get that rate right now is very diminished. So sharing it, getting anyone excited would just be unfortunately a disservice. So we're really hoping we can get a little bit of more, consistency with those rates. And we're actually hoping that more of these deployed capacity and less blank sailings can kind of help with that consistency, and it should. Anything you want to mention about the Red Sea before I move on to air?
Not to the Red Sea, but I don't know if you have this on your docket, but I think we should just mention about the major earthquake in Taiwan just a couple of days ago. And so that was a 7.4 or 7.5 magnitude. Looking at some of the world news, it's a terrible situation. So our hearts go out to the citizens in Taiwan. But I've read a couple articles this morning that it could affect some port operations in Taiwan because a lot of the shore cranes are now being checked for structural integrity. So that's another thing we have to watch in Taiwan. So it's a mad world right now, unfortunately. Back to you, Jason.
Getting less mad, thankfully, after a few years of some really just doom and gloom stuff. We're hopefully, these disruptions this year are not wonderful timing. We're really kind of hoping for a little bit of a smooth sail to fix things up, but
for sure
we're getting there slowly. But it's okay. It's just the way it works. Now, okay, let's talk about air. So I want to firstly apologize. On our last freight market roundup, we had some freakishly low air freight shipments. We had a couple that we had booked in really high volume under a consolidated program, and it allowed us to capture some really low rates. I talked about those rates, and those rates are not accurate for our everyday air shippers. So let me just give you an idea of how much higher the air freight rates are right now if you're shipping from China into the U.S. In general. So I'm just going to give you the range. If you're not under a consolidation program, if you're not, paying for the space on a monthly basis, if you don't have a deal with the carrier and you're kind of, oh no, we need to do this move as an air shipment, you should expect to pay between $5.91 a kilo and $6.86 a kilo. This is obviously dependent on a lot of factors, the biggest of which being, where's your origin, where's your destination, also how long in advance have you booked. So, your third-party logistics company, your logistics team has the ability to kind of find the best rate and things like that, but you should expect it to be around $5.91 to $6.86. And what's interesting about those numbers is we are well higher than we were 1 year ago.
Yeah.
So it's definitely something to keep your eye on. It's actually rising still. So if you do ship a lot of air, well, that's unfortunate right now. Bad timing. If you obviously can mode shift, great. But you should really think about your air strategy just in the short term, because we're not really seeing it letting up anytime soon.
Yeah, Asia Pacific rates are up 7%. Yep. But back to you, Jay.
Yeah. So, and actually, I'm going to say one final comment, because we're filling the time today, which is awesome, because you guys are going to see all the important clips over the course of the week. We're going to clip our marketing team loves taking the juicy details and firing them out, so you can hey, look, that was that point I was talking about, which is just perfect. But couple things going on. So we've got these all-time high, or just, year-wise, all-time high rates for air. And one thing that's been going on is global air cargo market demand has been rising a lot. So we're 11% up year over year. And this is for the third consecutive month in a row. And that demand is well outpacing capacity. So in that same time period, we were looking at an 8% increase of capacity. So that is definitely keeping those rates overly inflated. Another factor here that is kind of skyrocketing these rates and also keeping the capacity growth a little bit slower is the reliance on spot rates. So right now, the spot market is accounting for around 43% of all of the air freight rates. And that is, just to get an idea of what's normal, that's roughly 13% higher than pre-pandemic years at this time. Yeah. So that is, that's substantially higher. It's obviously harder for the air carriers to plan around. It's one of the reasons why these rates are going up. That is the final point I have for today. Anthony, you got anything else you want to mention before we just close up the shop?
No, I think it's time to close it up. I mean, I think there was a lot of great material that was on the show today for our listeners. We hope everyone will contact Jason and I in Supply Chain Solutions for all of their questions and supply chain and logistics needs. And I just want to tell everyone, make it a great day. And as always, God bless America.
Thank you so much, everyone.
See you next week, folks. Bye-bye now.